So I'm in community, a spiritual family for the first time, and I'm encountering concepts and ideas and notions about words such as meditation, mindfulness, prayer, a higher power or the higher power, power greater than myself, God. And I was open-minded about these things. I was living in a set of circumstances that clearly, and I'm so happy I was awake to this, thank God that I was awake to this, that I had no right to have any reservations about such notions. I was forced by my own desperation into a willingness. I didn't choose to be willing. I was forced by my own realistic view of the set of circumstances in which I lived to be open-minded about concepts that were outside of my mental remit to control and own them, which really is what mind is the capacity to individually process and of course create wonderful things, but also to own and control things so thought can move on to the next thought, or the energetic movement of thinking itself is ballistic. That is, it's a process, an energetic movement thought of moving towards the end of the current thought in order to retain a sense of equilibrium or homeostasis in the mental structure in order to feel once more in control again. So even in a conversation, we'll have a conversation, but we will seek to unconsciously move in that conversation towards understanding. Once understanding is achieved, the thought structure evaporates and we are left present to understanding. We go, I understand, I know, I see. And then there's a pause, and that pause is everything. But in that pause, thought, perceiving and the identification as the thinker, perceives its own death, its own loss, the absence of thought, to the identification as the thinking and thinker, the doer of the thoughts, perceives an end to its own existence, so creates the next thought. This is why when people begin meditation, they very quickly, often within 20 seconds or a minute, say, I can't do it. We do this, don't we? I can't do meditation. Because we're so identified as a thinking, feeling creature that we experience the emptiness of thought without external stimuli like TV, food, substances, shopping, pornography, and all the external attachments of the world. Not that they're all destructive. We use those in order to not think because we're busy experiencing and doing the thing. We're doing drugs, we're eating food, we're making love, we're having a conversation. But left to our own devices to sit in what is really a spaciousness of thought, an emptiness, an experience of our own pure being is so unfamiliar to the modern postmillennial, postmodern animal that it's anathema to us, it's terrifying, that we just don't know how to do it. Maybe even we go on holiday and there is a limiting of our access to the usual functioning of our day. So we remove ourselves from our job, from our responsibilities, and we place ourselves in a location in which there may be beautiful things to look at, or there may just be simple things to look at as we retreat from the usual parameters of things. This allows for our attention to be focused on the more pleasant surroundings around us, the environment, or the specific loved ones that are with us, or friends that are with us. So we use all these external things. This is a way in which we can come out of the usual monkey mind or the mind stream and the desire to control the stream of mind. I'd attended I'd been in community with these recovery people for perhaps a few weeks, maybe a couple of months. And prior to attending a meeting on any given day in the city of London, somewhere near the foot, in a church near the foot of the building known in London as the Gherkin, near the Lloyd's building, which was a piece of architecture, is a beautiful piece of art. But somewhere near the foot of the building now known as the Gherkin, on the edge of the city, at Whitechapel, somewhere near Whitechapel, in Babylon, in the business district. Prior to attending that particular group, I thought I'd have a go at this thing called prayer, so that, and this was a mental notion, so that when I attended the meeting, I myself could say my name, introduce myself, and then I'd have some topic to talk about this preceding experience. So there was an erstwhile, authentic, sincere thought to have something to say when I got to the group, because I felt like people were talking at such an elevated level that I couldn't possibly attain. And here, as you can hear, listening to any of these talks on this page, I seem to have mastered talking in some elevated way, some of which is understandable. I recognise my own difficulty with words and the struggle I have in articulating myself in an erudite and compacted kind of way, and that's okay. It's all okay. I don't mind. So I lived with my dog Phil at the time, great spiritual teacher, and having such a revulsion at this idea of anything that I deemed then at least to be religious in nature, or even spiritual, or somehow not within my control, I took Phil out into the hall of the apartment I lived in, and I closed the door. And my thought was, or the sense was behind that thought of shutting him out, was that I didn't want him firstly interfering in this thing called prayer. Now I was about to try it for the first time to see if I could catch a buzz off the back of it, or that I had something that would make sense in the uncommon sense that prayer is when I got to the meeting. Because of course it's uncommon sense, because we're talking to our true self, really, to our deepest self. Though initially, as I did then, as we do, we place it, because I'd placed my happiness in external objects for a lifetime, I still perceived, and this is often the problem that people have with coming to terms with a spiritual or religious life, is that because there is a notion that exists and is reinforced that God or a divine being is somehow outside of us, or looks over us, or is up there somewhere, up there, that it's an object that we pray to as an individual subject under its unyielding and unlimited power. Because we're used to looking at our senses and seeing happiness out there. So when we come to the idea of God, we place God out there, basically. So I'd shut Phil out, partially so he didn't interrupt the process, but fundamentally because I was so concerned that what I was doing would get out, that anyone would know what I'd done, that any of my cool mates that I no longer had anything to do with because of the nature of how I was living and the choices I was making, because they couldn't be around the choices I was making. They were making other choices and saw my choices as less than the choices they were making. Understandably, culturally, addiction is still seen as a moral dilemma, and they are conditioned with that same morality. It takes the fall into addiction itself to understand it's not a moral issue. It's not an issue of choice. It's not an issue of agency. Addiction is a notion of being had. It's not that I had addiction. It's that addiction had me. It has us. We are lost. We are not operating out of our usual consciousness and making choices. We are having choices made by us, by a system and a complex set of patterns and behaviours that are doing life for us. We are owned. We are not the owner of. Couldn't be any clearer, having lived that life extensively for more than a decade. I put my hands together, perceiving an object outside of myself, I readily named it God because it's a short word and it was simple to use. And perceiving that my fundamental error was the loss of a parent as a child and the more recent loss of a relationship with a female partner, or the latest of a handful of those I'd had over a lifetime. At the age of 36, I put my hands together and feeling that this predicament I was in was the absence of feminine energy in my life, because there'd always been a sense of the absence of at least external feminine energy in my life, though there was some access to an internal sense of it, as much as male energy can access feminine energy, and it can a little, especially when that male energy is influenced by feminine energy. And I was, real wisdom, I was heavily influenced by feminine energy, by its very absence, because I sought it. There was a space in me that unconsciously and sometimes consciously knew that there was a need to be influenced and be around feminine energy because of its very absence. Such is the paradoxical nature of our existential view of all life, that it doesn't really contain opposites, it just contains oneness, or the lack of two-ness, or the undivided. Experience is one experience and it's undivided by the next experience. They are a linear thread. Regardless, I put my hands together and said, God, please send me someone to love, because then I'll be okay. Now there's an innocence, there's a sweetness, there's a brokenness, and there's a masculinity to, and a damagedness I'm reluctant to confess still. Oh, look at that reluctance. How vulnerable and how delicate and how uninformed that is. But it was a small boy praying for his mother in some way. It was a lover praying for his recently departed partner. And it was a thread between the age of 11 at the loss of a mother and the age of 35 at the loss of the partner, and the thread that run between those two things that had informed that very simple, humble, authentically offered statement. And then I sat, unable to know what to do with that. Phil the dog scratched at the door. The sound of a dog scratching is the sound of spirituality, is the sound of the moment for that apparent creature, animal, being present to what is, with an emergent desire to be reconciled with a human companion. Nothing more spiritual than the sound of a dog scratching. Gorgeous. But Phil needed to wait. I wasn't waiting, I just didn't know what to do after I'd said that. The reality of the situation was I was sitting on my knees in front of the picture of the goddess, in front of a picture of the god Shiva from the Hindu tradition, because I'd had some period, even in my earlier seeking and searching around Krishna conscious movement, very fruitful time, and an indicator much later, even later after this first prayer, authentic prayer of this type, that I had always been seeking, that everything about life is seeking, though what we usually think we're seeking is happiness. And often we don't even think that that's what we're seeking, but we are seeking happiness. And we're seeking that abolition of mind, that's falling into the moment. And substances have been a very good facilitator of being present to what is. But because they're substances, we become present to what is, and as we withdraw, as we come away from the experience of the substances in the body, we return back to the mental plane, the emotional plane, the story of me. And at that point, into my conscious mind, from a deeper place, a much deeper place than this usual thinking mind, rose organically the words, I am love. I am love. Now, having felt that I was praying to an object there, I simply felt that those words were offered to me from there. Whether it was external, it certainly rose inside of me. I am love. God is love. Now, there's a lot to be said about the nature of love. There are love styles, there are love types, but we certainly know there is love with a capital L and there is love with a small l. Love with a small l, we might say, is the love of objects, images of ourselves, the love of substances. There is romantic love, there is love of family, there is the love of a child, the love of a baby, there is the love of good food, and I have that, certainly have that love of good food. And again, there is this divine love, this notion that there is a bigger story than my own. Now, I had, at this point, exhausted my own story. I was at the end of the Billy story, and I felt I needed at that time. I didn't know I needed it then, but there needed to be a new Billy story. When people ask me, what made the difference of you coming out of addiction? What was the significant element that was present that meant you finally escaped that time when you was put in a safe environment? And it was that I wasn't escaping substances so I could have my life back. There's no back. Back doesn't exist. It's just a thought. There is always the next new, even though its dynamics may be exactly similar to a new that we might have known before, which again, the before is still just a recollection of thought and feeling in the present moment. The past does not exist. It is the rising of thoughts and feelings that we're presently having about a present recollection of what was then the present that was happening to us. So we can have a present recollection of a previous present recollection of a previous present recollection. Struggling to say that. But there is no back. It doesn't exist. We cannot make America great again. We can make America great. We can make Britain great. We could make existence for all sentient species and all life on Earth great. How about we do that? We make all life great. We make all life, collectively make all life as great, or know that it is as great as it already is. Let's make everything know that it's already great and nothing is missing. Nothing need be done in order to make it as beautiful and as broad and as open and as fantastic and as exciting and as creative as it already is. The words I am love came out. I went to the meeting and waiting till the end of the meeting in order to say, my name is Billy, and I prayed before I came to the meeting today. You see, I'm trying to integrate into the group and speak as they do, talk about prayer. So I consciously decided to pray so that I could be part of the group because I felt so alone and isolated. And I asked God to send me love. Couldn't admit that it was human love I was asking for. So knew there was another love. Asked God to send me love. And God spoke to me and said, I am love. And this made perfect sense at the time. Nothing could have been more helpful that I interpreted at that time, the response in such a way. Of course, they just looked at me, smiled wryly, and said, do keep coming back to the meetings, won't you? You're very welcome here. Now, that simple thread, that simple prayer, that flimsy reed of a prayer, upon that a wonderfully effective spiritual structure was built. Meditation, prayer, journaling, the same life that I had described to me as a lost soul walking into a group of peoples that were once lost but had been found because they'd travelled that interiority, they'd done the work on themselves. They'd created a new sense of self. And some of them had transcended ideas of self, though I didn't know what that was at the time. And so that was the undertaking and the path that I found myself going through. And I began to pray and meditate and journal and so on, and ultimately, right here, right now, became this person. Now, the I am love notion developed. The first transition in that was after a few years, 3, 4, 5 years, as I'd been doing that inner work, as I'd been developing congruity, the capacity to talk in a way that reflected how I felt, rather than talking a way that wasn't really how I felt, but projecting an image of myself and a chameleon, like one, different personalities for different people that I knew. As I transcended that new sense of a self-concept that was early sobriety, I began to become aligned with who I was and my values and these new beliefs, and became a champion of that, and talked about those incessantly, and talked about that wasn't by nature of work that I had done to me, but similarly, just as the substances had previously, it was work that had been done to me. Rarely will you hear me say that I've done a lot of work to myself. Frequently, you may hear me say a lot of work has been done to me. And so it is. All of the work has been done to me. There's no percentile. I have been unwilling to go along with that work, that grace, that givenness. But that work has been done to me, often by other people around me, therapists, teachers, spiritually awake individuals, by children, by adults, by circumstances, frequently, if not exclusively, by difficulty, struggle and suffering. Everything be a teacher. And so all of these things have enabled a modulation of my inner world to come to fruition, and at times to seek further still, because the path that I walked along seemed to become exhausted, and so new paths appeared, and I travelled them, inquired into them, to see whether this could take me to the next place. And there's always been a next place, and each next place has always been just right here, right now, and brand new, and a perception of it. And the core, the initial seed of I am love that's travelled all of that, that's never left, has been to internalize that idea of a power greater than myself, to talk to my interiority rather than an exterior object, that happiness isn't an external job. Happiness, or God, or love with a capital L, is an inside job. And so moving into that, sitting with that, being with that, what we call meditation, being with my own being, and then identifying that inherent and innate divinity, to become, to realize, to hear, to be exposed to the idea that I am 100% divine and 100% human. I am in the world, but I am not of the world. Those aren't two things I'm trying to reconcile. 100% divine and 100% human are made of the same fabric. They are as we are, as is all things. When isn't it a spiritual experience? When isn't the ordinary prosaic act of washing up or hanging the laundry, or pain or difficulty or suffering, divine in nature? Because it's all part of the experiential field. Life is ground, the whole field of life, of abundance, of everything known to the human animal, the human waltz, as part of the human waltz, is the field of experience on which life may happen to and for us and in us and through us. And sometimes things rise to figure and become figural, and we need to attend to this, or we are inspired by this, and then they fall to ground, back to the field. But nothing is impossible. Many things are improbable. But everything belongs, finally, because everything is that field of love. I am love. And finally, better still, in this latest embodiment of this loveness, or this loving that's happening through, is this: the I am, that I am, is love. Now take that and consider for yourself how many times a day we say, I this, I that, I went shopping, I went to the bus, I travelled, I loved, I made love, I bought, I retreated, I hurt, I struggled, I found this difficult. Every referencing of the I, that I am, is love in the divine. And the objects, the triggers for that divinity, the external world experienced through the senses, are the activities of the world, the things of the world that we all know. Human beings generally, and certainly at first, seek happiness in external objects. We use the external objects to bring about feelings of fluidity and balance and wholeness in the interior world. But once we forego, or once we reduce our reliance on happiness triggered by external objects through the senses, we move inwardly, and substances were always really good at doing this. This is why they're so compelling, and why people's external lives seem to collapse around them when you look at addicts on the street. They will sleep in a doorway for the sake of feeling that sense of beingness and oneness on the inside. Now that is, of course, a detachment from the external world taken to its most destructive and most extreme. But nonetheless, that temporary experience of interior fullness, and let's use fullness here with a small L, I'm not being glib of how difficult that life is. It is courageous to be a drug addict in this world. These aren't people with the absence of resilience. These are people that embody the idea of resilience and courageousness and living one day at a time because they have no other way of living. But the usual world doesn't see life in such a way, see this life in such a way. They see its destructiveness, and of course, it is, with a small d, inordinately destructive. But to come to, by whatever means, that interior sense of being, that I amness, or let's take the I out of it, it's a shared experience for every human being. That very amness is the same experience that it is for this apparent body, for your apparent body. Amness is the same for all of us. That is heaven, up here, right now. Not a geographical location, not up there with some external object or postcode in which happiness will finally be found in a life that we do not yet know when we die, where all our relatives are. If everyone has gone to a heaven or a hell, it's going to be pretty packed up there. But of course, a more uncommon sense making notion of heaven is that it's the embodiment of this amness and this beingness that is right here, right now, with a right-sized detachment from happiness found in things. And happiness can be found in things. We can find happiness in money. Money does buy happiness. It buys happiness with a small h, temporarily. The accumulation of millions of whatever denomination in the bank brings a certain amount of happiness. But soon, unhappiness will appear because if we place our happiness in external objects, it's happiness found in a thing. And things, objective things, all these things, the food, the drugs, the shopping, the relationships, the right partner, the next partner, the absence of this partner, the holiday, these are objects, and because they have objective qualities that we can describe to other people, the nature of objectivity and happiness in objective things is that happiness in the object passes, and then we replace the object. See that? It's easy to see that. Once we move interiorly and we find that very amness of our very being, we find the divine self. We reconcile that apparent opposite with the human self. We are in the world, but we know fundamentally and unendingly that we are not of the world. And then we know love in all its beauty and creativity. Thanks for getting this far. I love you.